So if you own a 3 to 5 bedroom duplex or flat, we just concluded a project on a 5 bedroom duplex apartment for light load. And that would also fit in a 3 bedroom flat or duplex to a 5 bedroom duplex. The budget, the number of panels, the number of batteries, the inverter capacity, all you have to do is to just copy and paste. We're also going to be showing you the load calculation that we did and all the safety system that we used to be able to set up this system perfectly well. So let's dive in. Guys, so we're calling this a light load simply because it's designed to carry just the essential loads that are needed for the house day-to-day running. That means once in a while you can switch off certain things to switch on certain things. The house has about 4 ACs, but the system is designed to carry 2, which means they would all not be running at the same time. They'll be running at intervals. Okay, so let's start with the load calculation for this project. So he has a 1 horsepower inverter AC, and that is about 700 watts. And then at the parlor, there is a 2 horsepower inverter AC, which is around 1000 watts. And then we have bulbs, which we can give an average of 15 watts each. Allocating 10 bulbs, and that will give us a total of 200. The house also have about 5 bedrooms, so let's do 4 TVs. So even if you have a 4 bedroom, or for a 3 to 2 bedroom, you can use 2 TVs or 3 TVs, or let's max it out at 4 TVs. So we have an extra allowance if all TVs are not functioning at the same time. So we will be allocating 200 watts because that is what most big smart TVs consume at maximum usage. But there would also be some allowance from this as well. So we would do 200 watts. That would be times 4. So we have a total of 800 watts for TVs alone. And then he also wanted to power his pumping machine to be able to pump water. But then we ended up not connecting the pumping machine because the connection of the house kind of isolated the water pump to be just for the NEPA and the generator. I see no sense in investing up to 4 million naira in an inverter system and not be able to pump water. So pump, that will be around 1500 watts. And he has a big freezer which he wanted to stay on 247. Most freezers are around 200 watts. That's big freezers around 200 watts, but we'll be allocating 300 watts to this freezer. And then he also has a pressing iron, but we advised him to get inverter iron. Inverter iron will consume far less than irregular iron. So inverter iron will give that 500 watts. So these loads that I'm adding these asterisks are loads that are not constant. If you want to pump water, it's once in 2 days and you pump for like maximum of 1 hour. So it's like 1 hour every 2 days. So it's not a constant load. And the same goes for the inverter iron. Unless you're a business person, I don't think your pressing iron will be on for so long. So these loads are going to be providing us once in a while allowances to do other things, to have excess power to run for longer, to carry these other loads. So let's get the total. What I would do, I'm going to split this system into 2. One for nominal load, and that would exclude the pumping machine and the inverter iron. And then we would have the maximum possible load, which is everything here, including the iron and the T. That's when they are all running at the same time. Although our client told us that he doesn't want to be running all this at the same time, he wanted a very light system. That's why we called it a light load model. But in order to give him the maximum possible allowance, we calculated everything to be running together. So this is a load. So we'll add all this figure together to get a total power consumption of 5,000. So this is our maximum possible load, 5,000 watts. But then you don't have your pumping machine or your pressing iron running all the time. So we'd also have a nominal load of which we would subtract 2,000 watts, which is a combination, of the pressing iron and the pump and the water pump. So on a very good day where these two devices are not being used, you're going to have this other load functioning, so you have a longer running time. And that will give us a total of around 3,000 watts. You see the difference? And we're going to call this the Lite. There's a big difference here, but we're going to be using more of this so that we have so much margin and the system can overperform more than what it was designed to overperform. So let's convert these two figures to kilowatts because our inverter system is rated in kilowatt and kVA. So we have here 3 kilowatts for the light load and 5 kilowatts for the maximum load. So like we've explained in subsequent videos, once you get the calculation of the house, the next thing we proceeded to do was to calculate the inverter that we were going to get for this client. So we have a total load. We're leaving this because we want to give as much allowance as possible so our system can overperform beyond expectations. We're taking 5 kilowatts as the load, assuming both pumping machine and pressing iron stays on alongside a 2 horsepower and a 1 horsepower inverter AC continuously run. We would have 5 kilowatts maximum. Not about this 5 kilowatts, we recommended a 6.2 kVA or kilowatt inverter. We would have actually gone further to give him a 10.2 kVA so that he can do daytime running together with the solar, so there isn't much sag on the battery. But during the night, he wouldn't max out this 10 kilowatt on the inverter. The load is going to drop to below this 6.2. But we decided to go for this because, number one, this client wanted the most cost-effective as opposed to an overkill design. So we went for a 6.2 kVA and it's performing wonders. So we've figured out the inverter needed. Which is 6.2 kVA inverter. Next is to figure out the battery. So this client told us he doesn't want to carry much load, he doesn't want to overload the system, he only wants the basics of his house to be running, which are the things we listed here. So the inverter would not always be doing this 5 kilowatts all the time. So for the daytime load, we're going to work with this 5 kilowatts since it's going to be aided by the solar panel. So in order to calculate the kind of battery that is going to be perfect for this system, remember our client does not want an overkill. So for the daytime load, this inverter is doing 5 kilowatts. For the nighttime load, however, the freezer is going to stay on. The pressing iron off, pumping machine out of the picture. So 3 kilowatts is what we'll be using as our nighttime. So we're going to be calculating for the battery based on the nighttime load, while the 5 kilowatts will be the daytime load because it's being aided by the solar panels. So we're going to be using the nighttime load to calculate for the battery. We want to give 6 hours runtime on full loading, which means both ACs are on, the bulbs, the TVs, and the freezer are on all through the night. So we want to give our client 6 hours of this usage at night without the solar panel, with a lot of allowances on these loads and the 2 ACs running, a very budget-friendly design. So we would be giving him 6 hours. And that 6 hours, if we consume 3 kilowatts every hour for 18 kilowatt hour. So here is the power that we need from the batteries. So we can either round up or round down. If we round up, we can do an overkill battery. If we round down, we'll do a budget-friendly battery system. So rounding up will give you an overkill power storage, which you might not even be able to maximize. But rounding down would give you a more cost-effective system on which you can manage this load and still get the best out of it. We ended up installing the 16 kilowatt smart battery pack of lithium ion. So about the battery, we opted for two different brands. Before we installed this solar model, we got a different model from a different brand. But that particular battery didn't have an inbuilt BMS to be able to be compatible with the kind of inverter that we used. Because this particular inverter that we use, which is solar, has a power management system with which it uses to communicate to the BMS in the battery with a different set of communication cables. So there was an incompatibility problem between the battery we got, which was from C-Touch, and that of the inverter, which is the solar inverter. So we had to swap out that battery and get the solar battery, which was scarce as at the time of the installation. So we had to delay the project by 2 days to be able to ship this battery down to the installation site. And I think this is a good place to chip in. If you're doing any solar installation setup, always insist on a battery that has a BMS. Even if someone tries to sell you a battery and tells you it has BMS and it's not written on the body of the battery, do not accept it, because a battery without BMS is very, very fragile. It can easily just get compromised by any kind of situation, probably during shipping. Some of the cells in the battery pack can misalign. So many things that can go wrong with a battery without a BMS. So make sure the battery that you're getting has a BMS. So now that we've got the battery figured out, which is a 16 kilowatt hour battery for the charging. How long do we want to charge this battery? How long do we want to charge 16 kilowatts? So based on the load that we calculated with, to be able to work with this 5 kilowatts during the day and still charge the battery in at least 4 hours or 3 hours, this system by right should have at least an 8 kVA solar panel, which should be around 8,000 watts. So if we wanted this system to perform very well on the overkill level, we would have gone for an 8 kilowatt solar panel, which is half of the battery capacity. So it can charge this battery in 4 hours while carrying all this load. So we stepped down to around 6,100 watts of solar panel, which is 6.1 kVA or watts. So we're able to achieve this 6.1 kilowatts of PV with 10 pieces of 610 watts solar panel. That is 610 watt solar panel times 10. And then for the installation of the solar panel, we had 2 different strings of panels, 5 each one, going down to the breaker and then to the inverter. So here's a diagram of what we basically did. So you can see the breakers. There are 2 different breakers in the diagram. The one on the left is the breaker for the solar panel. So you can either disconnect or connect the solar panel or the PV input to the battery and the inverter from there. You can also toggle from the breaker the AC input. Now remember, all our installations are hybrid systems. That means our clients can also charge this from the grid. So there are two inputs to this hybrid inverter, which from the diagram you see here, one of them is the AC breaker for the AC inputs to the inverter, and then the other one is the PV breaker. So you can disconnect if you want to charge with only the PV. You can disconnect that of the grid by raising up the circuit breaker switch, and then you can do the same thing for that of the circuit breaker for the PV. Or you can just leave both breakers connected. Then we also have the bypass, the changeover switch that you see over there. That one helps to disconnect the house from the inverter system whenever you want to use just your gen or just your grid power to do other things that you don't want to power with the inverter system. So for the position of the roof, there are two ways we would have arranged the solar panels. The first would have been to split it into 5-5 facing different directions of the roof. But we traced the path where the sun rises from, and we were able to position all 10 solar panels to face that position where the sun rises from. That way you're able to get maximum power during the early morning period, and you're able to get a full charge on the battery early enough so the inverter can focus all the power on from the solar panels to the house, because it's done charging the battery. The battery will just only be helping. So all 10 panels were facing the same direction. So the first line of defense here starts with the input. If there is an over voltage from the solar panels, the solar circuit breaker, which is the one that you see towards the left, is going to snap and protect the inverter. But if somehow it escapes and somehow miraculously enters the inverter also has its own power management system, and it's going to shut down the whole setup, and the power would not even get to the battery, more or less the house. And then the second breaker, grid input for charging the inverter with electricity. If there is a surge from the grid, these guys can be really funny. But whenever there is a surge coming from the grid, the breaker for the grid is going to flip and disconnect the inverter, and by so doing disconnecting the entire system. But if that also somehow enters the inverter, it could damage the charging infrastructure, but the battery would not get affected. So that is for the first line of defense. For the second line of defense, we've talked about the power management system inside the inverter that can protect both the battery and the load, which is the house, from any form of surge coming from both the grid and the solar panel, assuming the circuit breakers don't do their job. So that is the second line of defense. It also protects the battery from over discharge. If the battery runs down, the inverter would also disconnect the battery, and the battery drain will stop immediately. And for this particular setup, we set the cutoff around 45 volts or so, I can't remember. And then we have the third line of defense, which is the battery management system that is built into the battery pack. This one also has short circuit and surge protection. It also has over discharge protection. It has the overcharge protection. That means if the protection system on the inverter were to fail somehow miraculously, and an over voltage from the solar panel gets into the battery management system, the battery will shut down itself. Also, if there is a short circuit from the load, which is the house, probably a damaged extension or a wire that has melted behind the socket, and the short circuit, that surge of load would be cut off by the inverter. It's meant to be cut off by the power management system inside the inverter. Third line of protection is going to cut it off. And as you can see on the display of the battery, these are the protection systems that we have active running on this system. But funny enough, this is just the third line of defense. Before any of this system will even be put to work, that means the inverter must have failed from the power management system aspect, and then the surge protectors must have failed, which is the mechanical switch, which is meant to detect surge and flip. So that is why this system is very much fail-safe. And there is also overcurrent protection, which can come from the charge controller that is inbuilt into this inverter system. If it's not able to regulate the current to voltage balance coming from the panel very well, and it somehow sends too much current to the battery management system is going to shut down and protect the battery. We also have over temperature protection. So if the battery temperature gets too hot, probably due to overcurrents, which there is also a protection for, the battery will also shut down. So this is the third line of defense. And then we have a fourth line of defense. This one is when everything has failed. The surge protectors, which is the first line of defense, probably somehow failed to flip for some reason. The power management system on the inverter somehow fails to interact with the battery management system, or somehow fails to defend the battery and the load from any form of surge or short circuition or overload situation. And then the battery management system on the battery somehow fails, or anything goes wrong in this system and there is anything that looks like a fire outbreak. The fourth line of defense is the fireball. This fireball is packed with high pressure extinguishing fluid. That means if there is any form of heat, fire, or anything that looks or smells like fire, it's going to explode and extinguish that fire in a matter of seconds. So that is the fourth line of defense. These are the four different lines of defense that we have to make sure this setup is very safe from fire, safe from any form of failure. So like we said, this setup can also go for a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom. It doesn't matter the size of the house. What matters is the size of the load. Give us a call, Hardware House Limited, by chatting up the phone number on the screen, and we can have your setup ready in no time. I'm Justin. Bye bye.